Hi, you've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Friday over here in the Atlantic for September 16th. This is dead quiet. It's honestly very quiet over here in the Atlantic right now. The only system we have left is Hurricane Maria, who did make it to hurricane status. Probably not a hurricane anymore. She's making extratropical transition, moving right over the southeast end of Newfoundland. And I haven't seen any reports recently of winds greater than 40 knots over this area here, this big island. I'm not sure exactly the name of this particular island, but I haven't seen many reports above 40 knots, so hopefully this is not going to be too bad for them. It's a quick punch. She's moving out pretty quickly here. This shouldn't be too huge of a deal, and she is now weakening and transitioning to extratropical, and we will be left with just about nothing out here. We're going to be watching for a couple of waves coming off Africa to try to get going in the African monsoonal circulation, and we have some thunderstorms east of the Antilles due to an upper low spinning away up in here, which is ventilating this region and bringing thunderstorms, but it's also shearing the area, so don't expect too much out of this. This area, what low pressure there is, very weak, will end up in here within a few days, and it just might be worth watching to see if it interacts with the tail end of a frontal boundary in here, especially with the pattern we've been talking about in this area of the world. So we'll keep an eye on this, but not an immediate threat by any means. And the reason it's so quiet right now is we have a downward MJO pulse over the Atlantic, Madden-Julian oscillation. You can see these brown lines here over the Atlantic area now moving into the Caribbean. These indicate sinking air, and sinking air does not promote thunderstorm activity. So for the moment, it's fairly quiet in here. It is forecasted to turn around, at least by the GFS. We can see the initialized brown like we saw by 5 days out. It's still brown in here. By day 10, it starts to go more white, neutral, and then green for upward motion. And by day 15, lots of green showing up for upward motion by the end of the month. And the models are still in a little bit of a fight over this. The reason the GFS shows upward motion returning is because it takes the MJO out of where it is now, octants 3 and 4, and into 8, which is favorable for upward motion in the Atlantic. The UK Met ensemble mean also takes this into 7 and 8, which favors Caribbean getting upward motion, but the European takes this out into 4, 5, and 6, and this puts the upward motion over the Western Pacific at the expense of the Atlantic, and the Atlantic gets downward motion if the MJO is out here. So there's a fight with the models right now. And I am leaning more towards here simply because if we look at the water temperatures globally here, these are the anomalies. Look what we have. The Atlantic's over here. And if we look at the global tropics, there's really not that much warmth going on. Indian Ocean, not really that warm. Western Pacific, pretty cold actually in the tropics. All the warm water is up here near Japan. Pretty cold down here in the tropics. We got La Nina going in the Central Pacific. Eastern Pacific is not that warm. The warmest basin by far in the Northern Hemisphere tropics is the Atlantic. You can see how warm the Caribbean still is in here. I know it's hard to see the Caribbean, but there it is. You can see the deep reds in there. And then we have some cool upwelling from where Maria, Irene, and Katia went out. But you can see that if we're going to take the areas from 20 north to the equator, it's very clearly the Atlantic which has the advantage here with the warm water, and the MJO is going to want to hang around where the upward motion is strongest. Where the upward motion is strongest will occur where the water is warmest. So I think we're more likely to see upward motion return here for the latter part of the season instead of staying out in the Pacific. So we'll see how that goes. But due to this pattern, we're going to look out to day 10 here on the GFS ensemble mean, 500 millibar heights and anomalies. We can see a big ridge over the western United States, big trough over the Gulf of Alaska, and then a trough over New England. And we talked in the last video about how this pattern has been around when we've had late season storms come out of the Caribbean and move northeast over the Bahamas, Eastern Gulf, Cuba, Florida area, things like that. We get this trough in here, and that brings cold air over the eastern United States, and we generally try to get high pressure on the western side of this trough, which helps force convergence down over the Caribbean and pile up the air and get low pressure down in the areas where we could get development. Now, the key to these troughs is the orientation. If you have the trough axis, no, the trough axis is here, we're going to get low pressure trying to develop to the east of the trough axis, which means we're going to have fronts extending down in here. And this is okay because if we get tail ends of fronts down into the Bahamas, Cuba, Florida, Northwest Caribbean area, that can help interact and get development going down there. But the key is the orientation of the front. If the trough is too far back, like in here, you get the fronts trailing down more of a meridional alignment, which just means north-south, and you end up with this corridor flow pressure right up the eastern seaboard. And that's what we don't want if we want development. We don't want a front that is like this, because that kind of a low pressure in here is not going to stimulate a focused area of convergence down in the Caribbean, Bahamas, or Florida area. So the trough has to be fairly just off the coast here, just over New England, have the low pressure way out here, the front bringing down like this so that we can have high pressure to the north of it, forcing air down towards the front and helping things to converge and get development near the tail, if that makes any kind of sense there. But we're watching for this pattern because it has stimulated development before, and we can see that as soon as 6 days from now, the Canadian model shows, if we follow the isobars here, a little bit of a area of broad low pressure in the northwest Caribbean. It looks interesting, at least in here. Most of the models have dropped development in here in the short term. You can see there's another storm forming in the eastern Atlantic as well. And even by day 15, the GFS ensemble mean still has low pressure showing significantly for an ensemble mean down here in the western Caribbean. The models have basically all dropped significant development of a system in the short term, but they do hint at things still being wetter in the Caribbean. Definitely lots of precipitation going on by late next week and the week following, and then broad low pressure remaining here for a while. So there's still a lot to watch for in here. I would like to see more model support for this idea, but I've been talking about this since the beginning of the month, so I'm not going to drop it right now because there's still a pattern that favors mischief in here. It would just be nice to see model support become better before we actually start looking and honing in towards the date of a development. But we still have that window through the end of the month where I think this is going to be favored, and as long as we have that pattern with high pressure up over eastern North America due to colder air, I think we will have to watch this area, especially as the Cape Verde season starts to wind down as we get towards the end of this month and the hurricane season really starts to shift its focus back here. Just like the beginning of the season, we start out farther west, then we move out here for the middle of the season, then we move back in here for the latter part of the season. So we are going to have to watch for this area, and we just now passed, we're only 1 week past the peak of the hurricane season. We have a lot of the season left to deal with, so we are going to have to keep our eyes out here. This lull in activity will not last forever. We're still going to have some storms that we may possibly have to deal with in land areas here before everything is said and done. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.